One of my specialties as an illustrator is creating bold, quirky work with colors that pop. And to do that, I usually use a limited color palette. Limited color palettes, which are 6 colors or less, are great for graphic illustration. Not only do they force you to simplify your range and make your work more flat, they also emphasize the geometric nature of the shapes you've created. So I've come up with an easy solution that works for me every time for creating these limited color palettes.
So I actually went over this a little bit in my other class, Playing with Shapes in Procreate, where I had you set up a still life, take a photograph of it, and bring it into Photoshop and create a geometric illustration. That was a very geometric, graphic, bold look, and so I encourage everyone to use these limited color palettes. So this is actually what this PDF is from. This is just something I've come up with on my own and is not necessarily from like a design website, but I use it in a lot of my illustrations and it tends to work super well for me. I think that it requires a bit of nuance, like playing around with things, but in the end, I always come up with something I love, even if I have to tweak it. My go-to solution for creating these limited color palettes is to use 5 easy categories: a neutral light, a neutral dark, a warm hue, a cool hue, and a color pop. So that's kind of what I've got here, and it's really easy to make your own. So let's just go ahead and open up a new document and start playing with those. Feel free to use a circle like I was using here to create your colors. I mean, this is kind of how I do it. You can just brush on colors if you want instead, but I like this because then I can just fill the layer like I was showing you with that Option-Shift-Delete trick. So I just make 5 little circles. And the best part about this is you can like group everything, and obviously this isn't going to be perfectly spaced, but I'll just group everything as like palette 1. And I can center it. It looks nice on the page. And if I want to, I can make duplicates of it. When I say I want to start with a neutral light, I usually your prime examples are going to be like black and white. But I try to stay away from extreme white, like hex code FFFFF, and extreme black, which is 00000. Just because they're a little too harsh on the eye, and it's always fun to kind of go with something a little bit more nuanced and unique, something that will set your palette apart. And if you look down here and look at these palettes I've created, neutral light and neutral dark are very relative to the palette that you're using. Like in palette A, the neutral light is more of a pink color, and the neutral dark is more of this purple color. And as long as there's some contrast between these 2 colors and the other colors in the palette, it should work pretty well no matter what. I typically tend to use the neutral light as like a background color, and the neutral dark as like a line work color or a shadow color. You can use them however you want, but I just think it helps a lot with like distributing and balancing color around the composition. So in order to do that, I'm gonna start with white for this first one, and I'll just kind of drag it around the color picker. You can also use the color wheel like I have here. We talked about the wheel in the beginning of this class, and I think it's always helpful to look back at that, and you can kind of change the hue of it. I personally am just super drawn to pink and purple, so I'm gonna go with this like cooler pink. Maybe I'll make it a little bit lighter, and I'm using that Option-Shift-Delete again. Select the second color. Maybe I'll go with like a dark brown or something to go with like a little bit of a warmer palette. And then from there we have our neutral light and neutral dark. So we'll also want to go with a warm hue. When I think warm, obviously you look at the color wheel and you see reds, you see yellows, you see oranges, even pinks can be more warm. But you could always have a really warm green color. If you dragged the green down to the yellow area, let's just play with a warm green. And then after that, we have a cool hue. If I'm thinking about colors in the typical palettes that we talked about earlier, like complementary colors, and I wanted to use that here, I could go with something that's red, kind of the opposite of this green color. It's a cool hue though, so maybe we go like a cool red. think that ended up a little bit warmer than I wanted, but maybe if we did like a more like magenta-y. For the last one, I like doing a color pop. So that's sort of like an unexpected color that's going to make the viewer more interested in the illustration, draw their eye in a little bit. So I do like using yellows and like really poppy colors, but you saw that magenta color I just pulled up, like something like that could even be really nice, something that's really hot and bounces off the other colors. But if you want to like see how all these colors work together, you can start dragging them over each other and kind of testing them out. And I can tell that this magenta is kind of vibrating with the green here. So it would be kind of awkward to place them next to each other anywhere. So I'm just gonna make sure that the color I use works with everything else. And this yellow seems to work. So there's one of my first palettes. I'm going to encourage you to do the same. Create your own palette using the neutral light, neutral dark, warm hue, cool hue, and color pop, and maybe try applying that to an illustration. I am going to duplicate it and make a couple more. You know, you'll have lots of options to play with. Bring them into your base design, or you can go back and use this design and bring it there, and I'll show you how I'm working on that as I go. Okay, so in order to use this palette, I just like to drag the folder into the file I'm using, and then I can just shrink it down, put it in the corner, and then start distributing those colors. So for me right now, because I have this base design, I want to keep it like as its base color so that I can reapply these colors and save my progress as I go. So I'm just gonna name this grayscale. And then the second one will be limited color palettes. So I'm going to use that first palette I showed you and just start selecting all these layers and filling them in with that Option Shift Delete. So I personally, like a lot of times I'll use light colored backgrounds, as you can tell in a lot of my work. You don't have to do that. You could go dark here and make everything else pop. Fortunately, I've already kind of, separated everything with value here. So you're welcome to follow along with that and just see if your palette works with these values. And as you're going with these palettes, you might feel like it's starting to feel a little lackluster. Maybe you don't have enough colors. So you could start adding things in where they feel appropriate. So maybe I want these curlicues to be a different color. Maybe I'll do like a darker shade of green or something just to kind of add a little bit more visual interest, and then kind of distribute that around the frame. In addition, obviously you can go in and say like, maybe this magenta isn't exactly how I was thinking it was gonna feel. So I wanna do something more red, and you think that feels better. It makes more of a complement to the green. So perhaps you take that and run with it instead. There's no set rules for how you create your palettes. Obviously it's nice to stick to those 5 limited colors, but if you really aren't feeling those colors as you're working with them, it's best to play around with them. And as a rule, I make sure that I've got all the colors kind of distributed around the frame evenly. So we've got this magenta that's leading your eye around the frame. We have little pops of green everywhere, little pops of yellow everywhere, and we've got the main green shape to pull your focus into the center. Just kind of think about that. If you're trying to create a balanced composition, something more graphic, maybe keep some of these ideas in mind as you're distributing color around the frame. So now I challenge you to make your own limited color palettes. Make 3 or 4 of them, choose your favorite one and apply it to your illustration, or obviously my illustration, and post that in your class project. I would love to see what you do here.